You owe this community water!
You've never paid a cent.
The high-pitched metallic whine of police sirens tore through the heavy afternoon heat of Whispering Pines Valley. Jack Mercer did not flinch. He did not drop the massive rusted steel pipe wrench gripped in his calloused right hand. He stood calmly boot deep in the damp red clay of his family's property, watching 3 white and blue county sheriff cruisers hurtle down the gravel road that separated his ranch from the manicured sterile borders of Whisper Hollow Estates. The dust behind them rose like a giant tan wall, blotting out the sight of the suburban homes with their identical stucco walls and matching terracotta roof tiles. The sun was beat down mercilessly, baking the clay into a hard cracked crust, and the scent of wild sage and exhaust fumes hung heavy in the stagnant air. The late cruiser skidded to a halt, kicking up a blinding plume of dust that coated the wild sagebrush and the barbed wire fence in a fine layer of grit. Before the dust could even settle, the driver's side door flew open, and Karen Whitmore, the president of the Whisper Hollow Homeowners Association, practically tumbled out. She was dressed in a pristine pastel blue golf polo and white trousers that were already getting speckles of red dust. Her face was flushed a violent crimson, her teeth clenched in a grimace of pure, unadulterated rage. She marched toward the fence like a general storming a fortress, her sunglasses perched precariously on her head, her breath coming in shallow, angry gasps. She had her smartphone gripped tightly in her hand, the screen glowing with lists of uncollected fines and neighborhood bylaws she loved to wield like a weapon. There he is. Officers, arrest him. Arrest him right now. He's destroying public utility infrastructure. Karen screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her fury. She pointed a manicured finger tipped in matching pastel blue directly at Jack. I caught him red-handed. I is cutting off our community's water supply. This is eco-terrorism. He's trying to kill our neighborhood, and I want him in handcuffs before he ruins our lakes. Do you see what he's holding? He has a weapon, and he's actively vandalizing our infrastructure. He's been a menace to this entire valley for years, and today he has gone too far. 2 county deputies, Ryan Cole and Marcus Owens, stepped out of the first cruiser. Deputy Cole, a seasoned officer with silvering temples and a tired, heavy-lidded gaze, adjusted his heavy utility belt and walked slowly toward the property line. He kept his hand near his holster, but did not draw his weapon. I knew Jack Mercer. Everyone in the county knew Jack Mercer, or at least knew of his family, who had owned the 300-acre Mercer Ranch since the late 19th century, long before Whisper Hollow was even a blueprint in a predatory developer's office. Afternoon, Jack, Deputy Cole said, tipping his hat slightly to block the harsh glare of the high sun. Mind telling me what's going on here, Mrs.? Whitmore called in an emergency 911 dispatch, claiming someone was actively sabotaging the main water lines of the subdivision. Afternoon, Ryan, Jack replied, his voice a stark contrast to Karen's high-frequency screech. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried the steady, unbothered weight of a man who spent his life working with stone and soil. I'm just doing some routine maintenance on my bypass valve. It's got a slow leak on the coupling. Needs a new brass gasket. Routine maintenance, Karen shrieked, marching up to the fence line. She stopped just inches from the rusted barbed wire that marked the boundary of Jack's ranch, her chest heaving as she glared at the quiet rancher. He's lying. He's turning off the water to our entire community. The pressure in our lower-tier homes has dropped by 70% in the last 30 minutes. My pool fountain is barely sputtering. The waterfalls at our main entrance are completely dry. He's doing this maliciously because we fined him for his dilapidated barn. He's trying to extort us, and he's using a giant wrench to do it. I thinks he is above the law just because his family was here first. Jack slowly turned his head to look at Karen. His gray eyes were cool, empty of emotion, and completely unreadable under the brim of his faded canvas hat. Your pool fountain isn't my concern, Mrs. Whitmore, and neither is your HOA. I'm on my land working on my valve connected to my water. Your water. Karen laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed off the granite cliffs behind them. This valley's water belongs to the municipality and the association. Whisper Hollow Estates has an exclusive utility easement for this entire sector. You don't get to touch those valves, you stubborn old relic officers. Why aren't you handcuffing him? He's standing there with a dangerous weapon. She pointed frantically at the 36-inch steel pipe wrench in Jack's hand, which was grease-stained and heavy enough to crack a car engine block. Deputy Cole sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache coming on. Mrs. Whitmore, a pipe wrench is a tool, not a weapon, unless he swings it at someone. And right now, he's just standing on his own grass. Now, Jack, she's right about one thing: the water pressure in the subdivision next door is dropping fast. Is your valve connected to their main line? No, Jack said simply. He tapped the rusted iron body of the massive valve assembly that rose from the ground like a prehistoric iron beast surrounded by wild desert weeds. This line goes straight up to the granite vein. It feeds my house, my cattle troughs, and my orchard. If their pressure is dropping, they've got their own leak to worry about. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to finish replacing this gasket before the pressure from the aquifer builds up too high. Don't you dare turn that wrench, Karen screamed, reaching over the barbed wire as if to grab the tool herself, her fingernails clawing at the empty air. I will have you sued for millions. I will have a lien put on this pathetic dirt patch of a ranch. You are going to ruin our golf resort's grand opening next week. We have investors coming from 3 states. If you turn that valve, you are destroying our livelihoods. You are an obstacle to progress, Mercer. Jack didn't answer. He adjusted the jaw of his wrench, clamped it onto the massive hexagonal bolt of the valve bonnet, and with a slow, powerful heave of his broad shoulders began to turn it. A sharp hiss of pressurized air and cold mist escaped from the threads, smelling of deep, ancient earth, wet granite, and stone. Karen flinched back, cursing under her breath and brushing the mist off her polo, while the deputies watched with a mixture of professional curiosity and growing unease. They knew that in this dry, sun-scorched valley, water was more valuable than gold, and whoever controlled the flow held the ultimate power. They were standing on the precipice of a war that had been brewing for 5 years, ever since the developers of Whisper Hollow had carved their gated community into the foothills of the granite ridge, completely ignoring the quiet man who lived at the bottom of the slope. The Mercer Ranch was older than the county itself. For generations, the family had scratched a living out of the harsh, rocky soil, but their true fortune was discovered in the summer of 1952. It was the worst drought in a century. The streams had shriveled into dusty, cracked mud channels, and the shallow wells in the valley had gone dry one by one. The cattle were dying, and the local reservoir had shrunk to a puddle of hot sludge. The leaves on the oak trees had turned a brittle brown, and the constant dry wind carried the taste of ash and dust. Jack's grandfather, Silas Mercer, refused to abandon the land. While his neighbors packed their belongings, loaded their trucks, and sold their ranches for pennies on the dollar to predatory land speculators, Silas hired a team of wildcat well drillers from the southern oil fields. He pointed his finger at a sheer, jagged cliff of solid red granite at the eastern edge of his property and said, "Drill there." The drillers thought he was mad. Granite is incredibly dense, nearly impossible to penetrate with standard water rigs of that era, and notoriously dry. But Silas was stubborn. For 3 weeks, the deafening rattle of the percussion rig echoed off the canyon walls, keeping the entire valley awake. They shattered dozens of hardened steel drill bits, making agonizingly slow progress through the pink granite, sometimes advancing only a few inches a day. The drillers laughed behind Silas's back, calling it Silas's folly, and whispered that the old man was spending his life savings on a dry hole in the mountain. But at a depth of exactly 280 feet, the drill bit suddenly slipped, plunging into a massive subterranean void. The pressure gauges on the rig spiked so violently that the glass faces shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments, scattering across the rocky ground. A split second later, a deep, terrifying rumble shook the very foundations of the valley, vibrating through the soles of everyone's boots. The drillers scrambled away from the platform, shouting in terror as the earth beneath them groaned and buckled. With a deafening, thunderous roar, a torrent of water exploded out of the borehole in the granite cliffside. It wasn't a mere trickle. It was a high-pressure geyser blasting a column of ice-cold, crystal-clear water 60 feet into the burning desert air. It was a miracle born of rock and determination. Silas Mercer had tapped into a prehistoric, pressurized artesian aquifer trapped deep within the fractured granite faults of the mountain range, a geological anomaly that came to be known as the Granite Vein. Realizing the immense value of this discovery, Silas did not hesitate. He immediately filed for absolute senior water rights under the state's prior appropriation doctrine. He secured a certified deed for the natural flowing artesian waters bursting from the granite formations of Sector 4, locking in a legal claim of 500 miners inches of continuous flow, an astronomical amount of water completely independent of municipal control. He recorded it in the county archives with a gold seal, a document that would become the most important piece of paper the Mercer family would ever own. Over the decades, the Mercer family built a highly efficient gravity-fed distribution system. The natural pressure of the granite vein was so immense that they didn't even need electrical pumps. The water flowed down from the high granite basin through a series of thick-walled steel pipes feeding the ranch's reservoirs, irrigating the orchards, and watering the livestock. It was a sustainable, perfect loop of resource and stewardship. When the developers of Whisper Hollow Estates bought the neighboring land in 2021, they saw the mountain foothills as a prime location for a luxury-gated community. They built 500 high-end homes complete with emerald green lawns, artificial lakes, and a sprawling 36-hole championship golf course that required millions of gallons of water a day to remain playable under the searing sun. They marketed the community as a green oasis in the high desert, completely ignoring the ecological reality of the arid climate. The HOA, led by the ruthlessly ambitious Karen Whitmore, operated under the assumption that their wealth and political connections made them the de facto rulers of the valley. They viewed Jack Mercer's ranch as an eyesore, a dusty relic of a bygone era that stood in the way of their master plan perfection. They wanted his rustic fences gone, his old barns demolished, and his land absorbed into their expanding golf resort. Karen had tried multiple times to force Jack to sell. She had sent developers with lowball offers, which Jack promptly tossed into his wood stove. When that failed, she used the HOA's legal team to harass him. They issued fines for visual blight because his historic barn's paint was peeling. They sent inspections to his property line claiming his cattle were violating local odor ordinances, even though the ranch had been there 100 years before the first golf cart ever rolled onto Whisper Hollow. They even attempted to block his access to the county fire road by installing an unpermitted toll gate, claiming it was for community security, until Jack successfully threatened them with a lawsuit. But their biggest mistake was assuming they could control the water. They didn't realize that under the dry, rocky soil of Whisper Hollow lay a complex web of geology, and that their entire luxury lifestyle depended on the very granite vein they were trying so desperately to conquer. By late afternoon, the scene at the property line had grown even more tense. The two sheriff deputies had refused to arrest Jack Mercer, stating that without a court order or clear evidence of a crime, they could not interfere with a landowner working on his own property. Karen was furious, pacing back and forth along the road, her heels digging into the dirt, frantically calling anyone who would listen on her phone, demanding that the county mayor or the water board intervene. Eventually, her constant complaints reached the county water district, demanding an immediate investigation. She was convinced that Jack was illegally diverting municipal water to his private cisterns. Within an hour, a white county utility truck arrived, and out stepped Arthur Vance, the chief water engineer for the district. Vance was a meticulous, no-nonsense man who had spent 30 years mapping the underground utilities of the county and knew every pipe, conduit, and valve like the back of his hand. He carried a heavy yellow case containing his most sensitive locating equipment. "What seems to be the problem?" Karen, Vance asked, carrying a clipboard and a ruggedized tablet. "This man Mercer is sabotaging our water," Karen declared, pointing at Jack, who was now sitting on a wooden crate sipping black coffee from a thermos. "He's turned some valve on his land, and half our neighborhood has lost water pressure. Our main pump station is running dry. He's stealing our water or blocking it, and I want his system shut down immediately. It's a blatant theft of public resources." Vance looked at Jack, then at the massive rusted iron valve rising from the clay. "Jack, you mind if we take a look? I've got my ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic pipe locating gear in the truck. If there's an issue with the pressure, we need to trace where the flow is dropping so we can figure out if it's a main line break." "Go ahead, Arthur," Jack said, gesturing toward the fence line with his coffee cup. "My land is open to you. Just don't let any of those HOA trespassers cross the wire. My bulls are in the next pasture, and they aren't as polite as I am." Vance smiled faintly and returned to his truck to retrieve his equipment. He set up a high-resolution, ground-penetrating radar GPR unit, which looked like a heavy-duty lawnmower with a digital screen, along with a secondary electromagnetic locator designed to trace metallic pipes deep underground. He calibrated the GPR typing in the local soil density parameters on the rugged touchscreen. Karen stood by, her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Go on, Arthur. Show them. Trace the pipes. Prove that he's tapped into our main distribution line. I know he is. There's no way his little ranch has this much water pressure while our multi-million-dollar system is struggling. He must have bypassed the meters." Vance began pushing the GPR unit slowly along the fence line, his eyes glued to the scrolling blue and red screen that displayed the cross-sectional density of the earth beneath them. He walked 10 yards, stopped, frowned, and then walked back. He adjusted the frequency on his receiver, knelt in the dirt, and began scanning parallel to the fence. The screen showed various layers of clay shale and granite fragments, but there was a distinct, dense cylindrical outline buried deep below. "That's strange," Vance muttered, tapping the screen. "What is it?" Karen asked eagerly. "Did you find his illegal tap? Call the police over?" "No." Vance said, his frown deepening as he stared at the readout. "There's no tap coming from our main line onto Jack's property. In fact, our main 8-inch municipal line runs nearly 300 yards to the east, well outside his boundary. There is no physical connection between our municipal grid and his property. It's completely separate." "Then why is our pressure dropping?" Karen demanded. "Look at that valve. He just closed it." Vance didn't answer. He walked closer to the rusted iron valve on Jack's side of the fence. He pointed his electromagnetic locator at the ground, right at the property line where the barbed wire fence stood. The device began to beep in a rapid, high-pitched cadence, indicating a major underground metallic conduit. "Wait a minute," Vance said, his voice laced with confusion. "We have a 12-inch high-pressure steel line running right here." He followed the signal with his locator. The device beeped continuously as he walked directly under the barbed wire fence onto Jack's property, pointing straight toward the massive valve Jack had been working on. Vance traced the signal in the opposite direction. It ran under the fence across the gravel road and directly into the Whisper Hollow subdivision, heading straight toward the pump house that fed the resort's new golf course and artificial lakes. Vance stopped. He looked at the locator, then at Jack's valve, then at Karen Whitmore. His face had gone completely pale, sweat dripping from his brow under the hot afternoon sun. "Karen," Vance said slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper, "did the HOA run a lateral line to this valve when you built the golf course expansion last year?" "Of course not," Karen said, though her eyes darted nervously to the side, her fingers twirling her phone. "We hired Apex Utilities to handle the connection to the county mains. They laid all the lines for the new irrigation system. They assured us everything was connected to the municipal supply." "Well, Apex Utilities didn't connect to the county mains," Vance said, holding up his tablet, which now displayed a real-time GPS overlay of the underground pipe. "The GPR and the locator don't lie. This 12-inch high-pressure line runs directly from Jack Mercer's private valve under the fence and straight into your community's primary reservoir pump station. It's buried 45 feet inside Jack's property line. It runs parallel to his fence for nearly half a mile before crossing over, and it is connected directly to his private artesian well. Your HOA hasn't been using municipal water for your golf course and lakes. You've been siphoning water directly from Jack Mercer's private granite aquifer." Jack Mercer took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked at the stunned deputies, then at the pale, trembling HOA president. "I told you, Mrs. Whitmore," Jack said softly, his voice cutting through the silent shock of the afternoon. "I was just doing some maintenance on my valve, and since it was leaking, I decided to close it. I had no idea your entire golf course was hooked up to my family's well." The revelation hit the scene like a lightning strike. The deputies looked at each other in disbelief while Karen's mouth worked soundlessly. Her brain scrambled by the sudden shift in the narrative. Deputy Cole stepped forward, his eyes locked on Karen Whitmore. "Mrs. Whitmore, did the HOA have a recorded easement to run utility lines through Jack's property?" I don't know." Karen stammered, her voice losing its shrill authority and turning into a defensive squeak. "Apex Utilities handled everything. We paid them over $200,000 to install the irrigation connection. They told us they had obtained all necessary county permits. My brother-in-law assured me everything was legal. We assumed they had the paperwork sorted out." "Apex Utilities is owned by your brother-in-law, isn't it, Karen?" Jack asked, his tone deceptively mild, almost sympathetic. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape route, but she was trapped between the deputies, the water engineer, and the barbed wire fence. Arthur Vance checked his digital map. "I'm looking at the county database right now on my tablet. There is absolutely no record of a utility easement, encroachment permit, or right-of-way agreement for Whisper Hollow Estates on Sector 4, which is Jack's land. This pipe is an illegal encroachment under County Civil Code 12.04. Furthermore, since this is a private water source, with senior rights filed in 1952, taking water from it without a contract is a direct violation of state water law. In fact, it constitutes water theft on a massive scale." "This is ridiculous," Karen blustered, trying to claw back her dignity. "Even if there's a technical boundary issue, you can't just cut off the water. We have a signed agreement with the county to maintain the fire reservoirs in our community. If you shut that valve, those reservoirs will drain and our homes will be in danger. It's a public safety hazard. You'll be liable for any fires. The county fire reservoir is fed by the municipal main on the east side. Karen, Arthur Vance corrected her coldly. This 12-inch line only feeds your decorative lakes, your clubhouse water features, and the irrigation system for the new 18 holes. It has nothing to do with fire safety, and you know it. It's purely for aesthetic and recreation purposes. Jack Mercer stood up, placing his empty thermos back into his canvas bag. He picked up his massive steel pipe wrench, the metal catching the glint of the fading sun. Well, now that we've cleared that up, Jack said, I'm going to finish my work. Wait, Karen cried out, stepping closer to the fence, her hands gripping the wooden fence posts. Mercer, let's be reasonable. If we are using your water, we can negotiate a lease. We can pay you a monthly fee. Just don't close the valve. If the greens on the new course dry out before the PGA Satellite Tournament next week, the HOA will lose millions in tournament revenue and sponsorships. Our home prices will crash. Think of the community. Jack looked down at the iron valve. My grandfather Chester always said that water is like blood. It belongs to the body it flows through. You tried to fine me $48,000 for my historic barn because you said it was an eyesore. You sent your private HOA security patrol to park at my gate and harass my suppliers. You tried to make my life hell so I'd abandon this valley. And all the while, you were stealing the very water that keeps your lawns green. He locked the jaws of the wrench onto the valve handle. Mercer, don't, Karen yelled, reaching through the wire. With one powerful, deliberate movement, Jack turned the wrench. The heavy iron wheel turned with a screech of metal on metal that sounded like a scream. Deep underground, the thick steel gate of the valve slid into place, completely blocking the flow of the high-pressure artesian water into the HOA's pipeline. Within seconds, a strange silence fell over the eastern boundary of Whisper Hollow Estates. The distant rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the high-capacity turf sprinklers on the golf course abruptly stopped. The cascading waterfalls at the entrance of the gated community gurgled, sputtered and died, leaving behind only the sound of dripping mud. There, Jack said, wiping his hands on his jeans. Your illegal tap is officially capped. I suggest you call your brother-in-law at Apex Utilities and tell him he's got some digging to do. You monster, Karen hissed, her eyes wild with rage. You haven't won. I will have our legal team file an emergency injunction before the sun goes down. We will sue you for tortious interference, and we will take this land from you. I look forward to it, Mrs. Whitmore, Jack said. He turned and walked back toward his house, his black Labrador Duke trotting at his heels. Behind him, Karen stood frozen at the fence line, watching the green grass of her precious golf course shimmer in the brutal heat, unaware that the real storm was only just beginning. By the following morning, the Whisper Hollow subdivision was in a state of absolute panic. The artificial lakes, which were designed to circulate water to prevent stagnation, had begun to drop rapidly under the intense sun, revealing muddy algae-covered banks that began to emit a foul, swampy odor. The lush emerald greens of the golf course, which required hundreds of thousands of gallons of water a day to survive the dry valley air, were already showing patches of sickly yellow. Karen Whitmore, desperate to save her reputation and the upcoming tournament, refused to wait for the slow wheels of the legal system. She was determined to force Jack's hand, believing she could bully him into submission. At 10:00 a.m., Jack Mercer was working in his workshop, sharpening the blade of his tractor, when Duke began to growl, his ears pinned back, his tail stiff. Jack walked to the window and saw a black SUV with amber flashing lights on the roof parked directly in front of his main pasture gate. Two men in dark tactical uniforms with Whisper Hollow security patches on their shoulders stepped out of the vehicle. One of them carried a heavy-duty bolt cutter, while the other was carrying a portable radio and a holster containing what looked like a semi-automatic taser. Jack's eyes narrowed. He walked to the corner of his workshop, picked up his double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun, loaded with nothing but heavy rock salt and birdshot, and walked out into the yard. He had also spray-painted a large wooden sign that morning and hung it on the gate. Private property, no trespassing. $10,000 fine for illegal entry. Can I help you boys? Jack called out as he approached the gate, his boots crunching on the gravel. The guard with the bolt cutters, a burly man named Vance Miller, sneered at Jack through the steel bars of the gate. Mr. Mercer, we're here on behalf of the Whisper Hollow HOA. We have an administrative order to access the utility node on this property. Open the gate or we will cut the lock and proceed under emergency provisions. You're standing on private property, Miller, Jack said, stopping 10 feet from the gate, the shotgun resting casually across his forearm. And those uniforms don't give you any authority outside your gated community. If you touch that lock, you're committing armed trespass. Read the sign. We have a right to secure public utilities, Miller shouted, raising the bolt cutters toward the heavy chain. This water line is vital infrastructure for the community. We have an administrative easement by necessity. That's a lie, and you know it, Jack said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. There is no easement by necessity for a golf course. Now I'm going to count to 3. If you and your fake police car aren't down the road by then, I'm going to pepper your windshield with rock salt, and then I'm going to call the real sheriff. You wouldn't dare, Miller blustered, but he took a step back, his eyes locked on the heavy steel barrels of Jack's shotgun. 1, Jack said, his hand moving to the stock. This is obstruction of justice, the second guard yelled, reaching for his radio. We are authorized security. 2, Jack said, slowly bringing the shotgun up, his thumb resting on the dual hammers. Before Jack could say 3, the roar of a powerful engine echoed down the road. A dusty black Chevrolet Tahoe with the star of the county sheriff's office painted on the door tore around the bend, its red and blue lights flashing. The vehicle slammed to a halt behind the HOA security SUV. Sheriff Thomas "Tom" Vance, a towering man with a thick mustache and a reputation for absolute fairness, stepped out of the vehicle. He didn't look happy. He slammed his door shut and marched toward the gate, his hand resting on his duty weapon. What in the hell is going on here? Sheriff Vance demanded, his voice booming. He looked at the HOA guards, then at Jack, then at the bolt cutters in Miller's hand. Sheriff, Miller said quickly, trying to stand tall. This man is threatening us with a firearm. We are trying to execute an administrative utility order on behalf of the county water district, and he's obstructing us. Sheriff Vance walked up to Miller, took the bolt cutters out of his hand, and tossed them into the dirt. Miller, you and your partner work for a private security firm hired by an HOA. You have exactly 0 law enforcement authority in this county, and you're currently standing on deeded private land outside the boundaries of Whisper Hollow. The county water district has already confirmed to me that they issued no such order. But Mrs. Whitmore said, I don't give a damn what Karen Whitmore said. Sheriff Vance growled, leaning in so close that Miller could smell his coffee. I've spent the morning at the county recorder's office reviewing the plat maps. Jack Mercer's land is entirely independent of Whisper Hollow. There is no easement, no right-of-way, and no legal authority for you to be here. If you or any other HOA vehicle crosses this property line again, I will personally arrest you for criminal trespass, conspiracy, and brandishing weapons under color of authority. Do I make myself clear? The 2 guards exchanged terrified glances. Miller nodded quickly, his bravado completely evaporated. Yes, Sheriff. Now get the hell out of here before I change my mind and book you right now, Vance said. The guards scrambled back into their SUV, turned it around in a frantic maneuver, and sped back toward the gated community. Sheriff Vance turned to Jack, a grim smile on his face. Afternoon, Jack. Afternoon, Tom, Jack said, lowering the shotgun. Appreciate you showing up when you did. No problem, Jack, but you should know Karen's got her lawyers working overtime. They've scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning at the county courthouse. They're trying to get a judge to sign a temporary restraining order to force you to open that valve, claiming imminent economic catastrophe for the subdivision. They're going to paint you as a lunatic who is holding a neighborhood hostage. Jack nodded, his face turning hard. Let them try. I've got my grandfather's chest. We've got every scrap of paper since 1952. Good, Sheriff Vance said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out an official-looking document. Because while I was at the county building, I filed this on your behalf. It's an official notice of trespass and property damage. Every foot of that pipeline they buried in your land is a violation. You have the right to demand they remove it, or you can fine them for every day it remains. Jack took the paper, a slow smile spreading across his face. How much can I charge them, Tom? Under county civil code for unpermitted commercial utility encroachment, up to $5,000 a day, the sheriff said with a wink. But since they've been doing it for 2 years without your knowledge, I'd say you have a pretty good case for back damages. I'll see you in court tomorrow, Jack. The county courtroom was packed to capacity the following morning. Nearly 80 homeowners from Whisper Hollow Estates sat on one side of the gallery, their faces filled with anxiety and soft murmurs of fear. They had been told by Karen Whitmore that a greedy, unstable rancher was trying to destroy their property values by cutting off their water. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by three high-priced corporate attorneys dressed in immaculate charcoal gray suits. She looked confident, whispering conspiratorially to her lead counsel, Richard Henderson, her chin held high as if she had already won. Jack Mercer sat alone at the defense table. He wore his best clean denim shirt, his boots were polished, and he had a single wooden crate sitting on the floor beside him. I didn't have a team of lawyers. He only had his grandfather's papers. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Evelyn Brooks took her seat behind the bench. Judge Brooks was a legendary figure in the county no-nonsense, sharp-tongued and possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of Western water law. We are here today to hear the matter of Whisper Hollow HOA v. Mercer. Judge Brooks began, her sharp eyes scanning the courtroom. The plaintiff is seeking an emergency temporary restraining order to compel the defendant to open a private water valve. Mr. Henderson, you have the floor. Richard Henderson stood up, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Thank you, Your Honor. The situation in Whisper Hollow is nothing short of an ecological and financial disaster. Due to the malicious unilateral actions of the defendant, Mr. Mercer, our community's irrigation systems, decorative lakes, and championship golf course have been completely deprived of water. We are facing millions of dollars in turf damage, the cancellation of a major televised golf tournament, and a catastrophic drop in property values. We argue that Mr. Mercer has no right to unilaterally cut off a critical water supply that has been active for over 2 years, and we request an immediate order to restore the flow. The public interest and the balance of equities heavily favor our community of 500 families over a single agricultural operation. He is holding our entire neighborhood hostage over a personal vendetta. Judge Brooks looked over her glasses at Henderson. An implied easement for a private ranch's artesian well. That's a creative argument, Mr. Henderson. Do you have a signed contract or a recorded deed showing this easement? Well, no, Your Honor, Henderson admitted, smoothing his tie. But the developer Apex Utilities installed the line with the understanding that the water flow was part of the valley's shared water table. The association has spent hundreds of thousands maintaining this infrastructure. Mr. Mercer sat idly by for 2 years while we used this water, which constitutes laches and implied consent. I see, Judge Brooks said. She turned her gaze to Jack. Mr. Mercer, you are representing yourself today. What do you have to say to these claims? Jack stood up slowly. He didn't address this gallery. He looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I didn't sit idly by for 2 years, Jack said. I didn't know they had tapped into my well. The pipeline was buried deep underground 45 feet inside my property line without my knowledge or permission. They did it clandestinely without filing for county encroachment permits. They hid it from me, and they hid it from the county. Jack reached into his wooden crate and pulled out a rolled-up blueprint. This is the official plat map and land survey of Sector 4, completed and certified by the county surveyor in May of 1952. It shows the boundaries of the Mercer Ranch. And this, he pulled out a second newer document, is the land survey completed just 3 months ago when the HOA tried to fine me $48,000 for my historic barn. They forced me to resurvey my land, hoping to prove my barn was encroaching on their golf course. But the survey backfired. He handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them up to the judge. As you can see, Your Honor, Jack continued, the survey confirmed that not only is my barn entirely on my land, but the HOA's golf course boundary actually encroaches on my property. More importantly, when the county water engineer Arthur Vance scanned the ground 2 days ago, he discovered that the 12-inch high-pressure line feeding their golf resort was buried deep inside my deeded land. Judge Brooks carefully examined the maps, her eyebrows rising. Mr. Henderson, is this true? Is this pipeline located on Mr. Mercer's property? Henderson cleared his throat, his face turning a light shade of gray. Your Honor, our clients were under the impression that Apex Utilities had secured all necessary rights. If there was a technical boundary error, we are prepared to compensate Mr. Mercer for a retroactive easement. There is no technical boundary error here, Mr. Henderson, Judge Brooks said, her voice dropping to a dangerous icy tone. This is a blatant, unpermitted utility encroachment on private land. But let's move past the land for a moment and talk about the water itself. Who owns the water flowing through that pipe? Karen Whitmore stood up, ignoring her lawyer's frantic attempts to pull her down. We do, Your Honor. The water table belongs to the valley. We have a municipal water charter. Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Brooks barked, slamming her gavel once with a sound like a pistol shot. You do not speak out of turn in my courtroom. Judge Brooks turned back to Jack. Mr. Mercer, do you have documentation of your water rights? Yes, Your Honor, Jack said. He pulled a thick leather-bound folder from his crate. This is the original water deed filed by my grandfather Silas Mercer on August 14, 1952. It grants the Mercer family senior absolute prior appropriation rights to 500 minors inches of the natural artesian flow from the granite formations of Sector 4. It is registered with the State Department of Water Resources, document number 4412. The bailiff took the folder and passed it to the judge. Judge Brooks opened the yellowed pages, her eyes scanning the elegant typewritten text in the official gold seal of the state. She read silently for several minutes, the only sound in the courtroom being the nervous shifting of the Whisper Hollow residents in the gallery. Finally, Judge Brooks closed the folder and looked down at the plaintiff's table. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Mr. Henderson, Judge Brooks said, her voice echoing off the high plaster walls of the courtroom. Are you familiar with the state's prior appropriation doctrine? First in time, first in right. Of course, Your Honor, Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly. Then you should know that this document is absolute, Judge Brooks said, tapping the leather folder. Silas Mercer secured the senior water rights to this aquifer in 1952. That is nearly 70 years before your developers ever dug a shovel into this valley. This water does not belong to the municipal table. It does not belong to the county. It belongs to Jack Mercer. It is his private property, just like his cattle, his tractor, and his home. She leaned forward, glare-locking Karen Whitmore, who looked as if she were about to faint. The Whisper Hollow Homeowners Association has not only committed a massive civil trespass by burying a commercial pipeline on private land, Judge Brooks continued, but you have also been systematically siphoning tens of millions of gallons of private artesian water without a contract, without payment, and without legal authority. In simple terms, Mrs. Whitmore, your association has been stealing from Mr. Mercer for over 2 years. Your Honor, please, Henderson pleaded. We were unaware of the boundary lines. Ignorance of the law is no defense. Mr. Henderson, especially when the developer was your client's own family member. Judge Brooks countered. I am denying the plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order. Mr. Mercer had every legal right to shut his valve. In fact, he has the right to completely dismantle that pipeline if he so chooses. She picked up her pen, writing rapidly on her order sheet. I am issuing the following summary judgments. Judge Brooks announced, first, the Whisper Hollow. HOA is ordered to immediately cease and desist all attempts to access Mr. Mercer's property. Second, the HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Mercer a daily encroachment fine of $5,000. Retroactive to the date the pipeline was installed, which county records show was exactly 730 days ago. A collective gasp exploded from the gallery. Many of the homeowners began talking excitedly and frantically, realizing they would be on the hook for this disaster. That's $3.6 million, Henderson cried out, his hands shaking, his pen slipping from his fingers. And third, Judge Brooks said, ignoring the outburst, the HOA is ordered to completely remove the encroaching pipeline and restore Mr. Mercer's land to its original condition within 30 days under the supervision of the County Water District. If you fail to do so, the daily fine will double. This court is adjourned. The gavel slammed down with a resounding crack. In the gallery, homeowners began to shout in panic, realizing that their HOA reserve funds were about to be completely wiped out, and that they would likely face massive individual assessments to cover the multi-million-dollar judgment. Karen Whitmore stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, as her high-priced lawyers began frantically packing their briefcases, refusing to look her in the eye. Jack Mercer slowly packed his grandfather's papers back into the wooden crate. He didn't gloat. I didn't look at Karen. He simply picked up his crate, walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, and stepped out into the bright, clean morning air. 3 weeks later, the valley had returned to its natural rhythm. At Whisper Hollow Estates, the Grand PGA Satellite Tournament had been quietly canceled. The once lush golf course was now a patchwork of dry, yellowing straw and dusty dirt lanes. The artificial lakes had dried up completely, leaving behind cracked mudflats that smelled of baked clay and dead weeds. The grand waterfalls at the entrance, which had once sprayed cool mist onto passing luxury cars, were now dry stone walls covered in dust. Curie Dan đi qua lại, nhìn cái sân golf sơ xác mà lòng đau xót, nhưng họ không thể làm gì khác ngoài việc nộp phạt. The HOA board had held an emergency meeting attended by all 500 angry homeowners. In a unanimous shouting vote, Karen Whitmore was stripped of her presidency and her board seat. Her brother-in-law's company, Apex Utilities, was facing a criminal investigation by the state's anti-corruption unit for unpermitted utility construction and fraud. To prevent bankruptcy, the HOA had been forced to sell off several undeveloped parcels of land and issue a massive $5,000 emergency assessment to every homeowner in the subdivision. Karen, unable to pay her share of the legal damages and facing absolute social isolation in the community she once ruled, had put her luxury home on the market at a massive loss and quietly packed her things. On a warm Friday evening, Jack Mercer was sitting on his front porch Duke resting his heavy head on Jack's boot. A dusty silver sedan pulled up to the ranch gate. A man in a simple khaki shirt and jeans stepped out carrying a folder. It was Gerald Marsh, the newly elected president of the Whisper Hollow HOA. Unlike Karen, Gerald was a retired school teacher who had lived in the valley for only a year, and he had spent his career teaching civics and history. Gerald walked slowly up the porch steps, stopping at the railing. "Evening, Mr. Mercer." "Evening," Jack said, gesturing to a vacant rocking chair. "Have a seat, Gerald." Gerald sat down, sighing as he looked out over the vast golden pastures of the Mercer Ranch. "It's beautiful out here, quiet." "It is," Jack agreed. "What can I do for you?" Gerald opened his folder, revealing a neatly typed document. "The board had a long meeting last night. We know we've got to rip out that old pipeline, and we're planning to start the excavation next week to comply with Judge Brooks' order. But we have a proposition for you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "We've realized that buying water from the county utility to keep our main lakes and the original 18 holes alive is going to cost us an arm and a leg," Gerald said. "We want to do things right this time. This is a formal, legally binding water lease proposal." He slid the document across the small wooden table toward Jack. "We're offering to pay you $20,000 a month for a maximum of 50 miners inches of water from your granite aquifer," Gerald explained. "The contract is entirely on your terms. You have the right to cut off the flow instantly if the aquifer's pressure drops below a safe level, and the HOA will pay for all the legal fees, the installation of a new, fully permitted above-ground meter station on our side of the fence, and a formal apology published in the county newspaper." Jack picked up the document, his eyes scanning the terms. It was clean. No hidden clauses, no sneaky legal jargon, and most importantly, it recognized his absolute senior ownership of the granite vein. $20,000 a month is a lot of money for a subdivision that's nearly broke, Gerald, Jack noted. "It's cheaper than bankruptcy," Gerald said with a wry smile. "And it's a fair price for the best water in the state. We want to be good neighbors, Jack. We should have been from the start." Jack looked out toward the eastern ridge where the red granite cliffs glowed like molten copper under the setting sun. "Sâu trong hemda ấy mạch nước ngầm ngàn năm vẫn đang cuồn cuộn chảy mát lạnh mạnh mẽ và tự do." He set the paper down and looked at Gerald. "I'll have my lawyer look this over tomorrow. If he says it's solid, we have a deal." Gerald let out a long breath of relief, standing up and extending his hand. "Thank you, Jack. I appreciate your grace." Jack shook his hand, a firm, honest grip. "Just remember, Gerald, the fence stays where it is, and my bulls don't like golf carts." Gerald laughed. "Understood, Mr. Mercer. Have a good evening." As the silver sedan drove back down the gravel road, Jack stood up and walked down the porch steps, heading toward the eastern pasture. He walked along the fence line until he reached the massive rusted iron valve rising from the red clay. He placed his hand on the cold metal wheel. Underneath, he could feel the faint, steady vibration of the water rushing through the granite deep below, a powerful living pulse of the earth that had survived the drought of 1952, the greed of the HOA, and would continue to flow long after they were all gone. Jack smiled, patted Duke's head, and walked back to his house under the first shining stars of the desert sky. The following months were a testament to how quickly a valley could heal once the poison of greed was extracted from its soil. The heavy machinery of the county-approved contractor arrived on a crisp Monday morning, not to lay illegal pipes in secret, but to dismantle the legacy of Karen Whitmore's administration under the watchful eyes of Arthur Vance and Sheriff Tom Vance. The massive steel pipes that had once sat deep within Jack Mercer's pasture were excavated, lifted by heavy cranes, and piled onto flatbed trucks. This physical removal was a cathartic sight for Jack, who stood on his porch sipping coffee and listening to the rhythmic hum of the excavators. Every shovel of red dirt turned was a public acknowledgement of Jack's absolute sovereignty over his land. Curie Don Whisper Hollow watched from the gravel road, no longer with anger, but with a profound, quiet respect. They now understood that the quiet man in the faded canvas hat wasn't an enemy of their community. He was the only reason their lawns had ever been green in the first place, and that his integrity had saved their neighborhood from a deeper legal abyss. At the eastern boundary, just on the Whisper Hollow side of the fence, a state-of-the-art above-ground water meter and pressure control station was constructed. Encased in a beautiful sand-colored brick enclosure designed to blend with the natural desert landscape, it was a physical monument to a new era. The brickwork was immaculate, matching the rugged contours of the valley, and a small brass plaque on the side read, "The Granite Valve Covenant, Cooperative Water Agreement, established 2026. The lease agreement had been finalized and signed by both Jack Mercer and Gerald Marsh, witnessed by Judge Evelyn Brooks herself in her chambers. It was a masterpiece of legal clarity. Whisper Hollow Estates would pay exactly $20,000 a month, adjusted annually for inflation, for the right to receive 50 miners inches of artesian water. The flow would be regulated by a computerized valve that would automatically shut down if the natural pressure of the granite aquifer dropped by even 5%, ensuring the preservation of the ancient water source for generations to come. As the first checks arrived, Jack did not buy luxury cars or take expensive vacations. He spent the money on what mattered. He hired a local contractor to repaint his historic barn, restoring the deep, warm crimson paint that his grandfather Silas had applied in 1958. He reinforced his fences with heavy split-rail cedar posts, and he set up a scholarship fund for the children of local family farms who wished to study agricultural engineering or water resource management at the state university. One afternoon, Gerald Marsh walked down to the new meter station where Jack was inspecting the brass fittings of the main flow meter. The sun was low, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and violet, and the first evening breeze was blowing down from the granite ridge. "It looks incredible, Jack," Gerald said, gesturing toward the crimson barn in the distance, which stood proudly against the golden backdrop of the valley. "The whole valley looks different now, more balanced. The community is happy and our lakes are clean and full again the right way." "It's because we're not fighting the land anymore, Gerald," Jack said softly, his rough hand running along the cool brass pipe of the meter. "My grandfather always said that the earth has a memory. If you take what isn't yours, the earth will eventually find a way to spit you out. But if you respect the stone and the spring, they'll take care of you forever." Gerald nodded, looking toward the red granite cliffs where the legend of the granite vein had begun. Sâu trong lòng đá ấy mạch nước ngầm vẫn đang reo rất âm thầm, một nguồn mạch của sự sống trong vật, và Bắc Điệt được bảo vệ không phải bằng những bức tường thành kiêu ngạo của một khu đô thị biệt lập, mà bằng lòng chính trực, những trang giấy tờ lịch sử bền chặt, và sự kiên nhẫn định của một người con xứ sở. They stood together in the fading light, listening to the gentle, steady hiss of the water flowing through the meter, a peaceful, ordered song of stone and spring that would echo through the valley for a long, long time, carrying the wisdom of the past into the quiet future.